a little show and tell. For those of you who've been around, you know what that's all about. You know, when the lights went out, I thought it was back at Hudson. First of all, I want to say that it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this year's induction ceremony. It is extremely pleasing to see three drivers from my neck of the woods getting the call. Three racers I have had the pleasure of doing the call of their many years of feature wins. Vic Miller and the great drivers that have strapped into his cars over the years, Mike Murphy and Pete Fiandaca. They were all an announcer's dream. Thanks for the memories, guys. Pete Fiandaca, where do you begin? Probably we should start by asking the question, how many drivers, officials, crew members, or promoters here today have raced with Peter, or Peter has raced for? Just give us a show of hands. I'm curious to find that out. We'll get quite a few. You know, many times in my announcing career, I've had the opportunity to make reference to what's in a number. It's always interesting to learn how drivers arrive at their car number. And for Peter, he launched his career with number 35. He went to Seekonk one night, and when he signed in, 126 registered cars were ahead of him. So he pulled out of the line and waited a bit, and he let 8 cars go by. And then he dropped back into the line so he could still carry the digits 3 and 5 on the speedway. It was that night at the Cement Palace that the number 135 originally graced the side of Pete Fiandaca's racers. His career began back in 1967 with an assault on the Westboro Speedway and Hudson Speedway and the so-called B Division. 1968 saw the late Anthony Venditti operating Westboro and Seekonk, so Peter went and raced for the Godfather. 1969 saw Pete move into the Grand Dam Division up the road here at Riverside Park and at Westboro as he raced for the late great Harvey Tattersall, one of the very best promoters. In the early 70s, Hudson, the Pines, and Monadnock Speedway became home to the kid from Fitchburg in late model competition. The modified division became a way of life for Peter in 1973 as he moved into the open wheel race cars at the park, Hudson, Monadnock, and Star, and a pinto-bodied modified. And it became clear at that point that Peter was going to move around and race at other tracks. In 1975, Hudson official Stevie Bird jumped on board and turned the wrenches, hitting the highway with the number 135. In 76, the famed Gremlin became Peter's chariot as he carried the names of Guilfoyle's Mobile and Jan Morgan Ceramics to Victory Lane all over the Northeast. The biggest win, a 200-lapper up the road at the park. Birdie stayed on board through the end of 1978. He was replaced by Stu Campbell as crew chief from 79 to 95. Bill Hurley and John McDonald also played a major part in Peter's career in over 25 years. In the late 70s, Peter became known as the Traveler Man. That was a moniker given him by the late Speedway scene columnist Joe LaRochelle. And the reason was simple. He would race anytime. In fact, he became the 70s version of an Eastern Bandit. He traveled anywhere, raced anywhere, making his presence known everywhere, and often barely making it back to Fitchburg with a couple of bucks in his pocket. It was not uncommon for the Traveling Man to hit the road after a weekend of racing at his local tracks. One year he headed out to New Egypt on Tuesday, deadheaded to Catamount for a Wednesday night show. He eyeballed to Seekonk on Thursday, but his then companion said, "Let's go sightseeing." So Peter obliged, but he had his sights set on Monadnock on the way back to Fitchburg on Friday night, and then he started the whole racing weekend over again. One season, Peter raced and won at Thompson, taking the checkered flag at 6:25 at night. He loaded up, headed for Hudson, arriving at 8:55 p.m. I know, I called that race. At 9:15, he had second place money in his pocket, and he was on his way back to Fitchburg. His famous shop was his driveway, where he prepared for his race cars on a weekly basis. If it rained, the race car just simply was not worked on. If he had to pull a motor, it was off to the backyard to a big tree he would use as a chain fall. One of those trees had limbs in it that had a Y shape to it, perfect for straightening bent frames and warped roll cages. Truly a low buck operation. In 1980, Peter rolled out with another late model. This one was dubbed Skid Row. Perhaps you remember it. It was the car that debuted the now famous Maxwell House coffee can. Peter was always good until the last drop. The 1980s through today saw the Traveling Man race late models, Pro Stocks, and Bud Lights as Star Hudson and Monadnock. And today, he continues 43, going into his 44th season at Hudson Speedway, where it all began back in 1967. All totaled, for 43 years, Peter has competed well over 2,000 races at 25 racetracks from the Northeast to Florida, winning 322 features and 19 track titles along the way. An incredible feat. A couple of other things I'd like to mention before closing. Back in 1978, when I debuted a weekly radio show in Nashua, New Hampshire, I wanted to kick that program off with impact, make some noise, give racing a big boost. I reached out to Pete Fiandaca. He was our first in-studio guest. He did that first show and he jammed our telephone lines that night. And in between the calls, I asked Peter a couple of questions. One was, you were the first driver in these parts, when I'm talking up at the Star, Lee, Hudson area, one of the first drivers in these parts to invite the kids in the grandstands in the Victory Lane for the Victory Lane photo. I asked him, I said, what's that all about? And he said to me simply, every one of those kids are the future of this sport, whether they end up out here on the racetrack or they bring their kids to the races someday, and we have to take care of them. The other question was, I always see you making the sign of the cross before the start of every feature. His response was, I did that the first night I raced back in 1967. A couple of times, I had to pull my guardian angel back in the window. I said, why is that, Pete? He was scared. You know, like Milmar and Manny in baseball, Peyton and Eli in football, Bridgie and Dale in racing, the mere mention of his first name, Peter, everyone, young and old, knows who you are talking about. Peter, there's a couple of guys that are not with us today that I know they are looking down with thumbs up and smiling faces, and that's the old barn rat, Bob Devaney and Stu Campbell. And for them, I congratulate you both. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to present to you and to the 2010 Near Hall of Fame, the driver of the famed 135, the Traveling Man, Pete Fiandaca.
I'm going to start this off by we were driving up Main Street, Jamie White, Andy Johnson, and myself, and on the radio it came along that Pete Fiandaca's in Fitchburg driving up on Main Street, listening to the radio with his Thunderbird. I'm going to donate this song to him, Ricky Nelson, the Traveling Man. And Andy Johnson said, how did you do that? And I said, it's John Spence. He's the announcer at Hudson Speedway, and he's also a radio disc jockey, and he just done it for us. And Andy Johnson says, we're pretty major, and I said, yes, we are. I'm glad that I got to race my way in, and I'm happy to say that I did it out of my backyard. I have to thank some people. These guys will help me right from the start. Dick Angus, Dave Rosbach, Stevie Bird, Archie Ashambo, the Bakers, the Mackeys, Texas Engines, Bob Johnson. Bob Renstrom, when he used to go to the races and see his name over the driver's door, he'd say to me, Pete, I'm the driver, let me buy some tires. I called Marvin Rifkin once and said, I'd like to run that big show at Seekonk. I think I got a way we can beat him. He says to me, I'm an M&H dealer, not a McQuarrie dealer. I said, Marvin, do you want to win the race? He said, sure. I said, the tire has straight edges across the top. It's got no crown in it. With that machine you got out back, we can redesign the tire and we can win the race. He says, how many do you need? I said 10. He said, you want me to pay for them? I said, of course. Sunday morning, I blew the motor at Saturday night, and I called him and said I couldn't go. He says, what do I do? I said, get Babe Branscombe and Bobby Gahan to run the tires. They'll do just fine. The only kind of car that I never drove and wish I did was a cut-down. Ronnie Bouchard had the prettiest cut-down, nicest looking. Tinker Projan and Vic Angus had the fastest cut-down, and Reno Tolonen had the most unique cut-down of the three. But my favorite car was, every day when I walked home from school, I'd stop at the Flying A station for 2 years. They had a novice car from from Brookline Speedway, and it was purple with a red zero. It was a 33 Chrysler Coupe, and Tinker Projan drove it. That was the nicest looking car from Fitchburg. I remember getting a lot of great advice over the years. Frank Michelson told me if I drive in hard and get on the gas quicker coming out, I can beat a car that's better than mine. Oscar Ridland told me, you're losing your rhythm, Pete, with 5 to go. He said, when you see that flag man put his hand out with 5 to go, sit back in the seat and say to yourself, there's 25 or 30 laps to go and you'll be just fine. He also told me just to run Hudson in the Pines and he'd make me a star. And I said, Oscar, I want to drive a race car. I don't want to be a star. Billy Greco, I asked him once, how do you make that move from the top to the bottom? Billy says, make the move, think about it. Do you know what I mean? And I said, yeah, Bill. If I think about it, the hole won't be there. You know what I mean. Dave Dion ran Norwood on Saturday nights. I ran Star on Saturday nights. He came up to me at Hudson and said, how did you do? And I said, terrible. Guys I can run with when they come down from Star to Hudson, I couldn't even keep up. I was 2 laps down. He said to me, Pete, you're not driving and setting the car up right. You got to set her up with a lot of wedge and stagger and drive her off the right rear. I went back the following week and finished 8th and been driving off the right rear ever since. Grundy Judkins had an ad in the back of a magazine on the back page for Hayes Clutches that said, you got to finish before you can win. And I figured he was right. If I could finish, maybe I could win one. It's so important to listen to advice, but you still have to pick it apart and use what works for yourself. Anthony Vendetti said to everybody, what come first, the chicken or the egg? And I said, I can get them both at the market, it doesn't matter. I just want to say that for 30 years, the guy that made us all look better than we were was Val Lasser. The name was Speedway Scene, but he called it the paper. I think what helped me get into the Hall of Fame is that drivers are lucky to have 2 or 3 good cars in their career. I had 10 to 12 good cars. Marty Hardy also told me there's more good drivers than good cars, and he was right. I was lucky that I had the right car at the right time. At Riverside Park in the 1970s, I had a Gremlin that was perfect for that place. It was such a good car that I could take it to Monadnock and Hudson without changing a thing. The smaller tracks seemed to suit my style of driving. I raced against all the great drivers over the years, but different drivers were tougher at different tracks. Like Mike Murphy and Bobby Dean always brought the best out in me at Hudson Speedway. At Star, there was all the Bezansons, all the Browns, all the Baldwins, Duncan Miller, Steve Koloski. They were all great to race with. At Monadnock and Riverside Park, there was so many good drivers and so many good cars that it was tough just to get in the feature. Looking back, I was able to race against a lot of great drivers at a lot of great racetracks. I got along with almost every track official I ever dealt with. I had my own way of communicating with them. A guy at Star Speedway said to me, "I'm the janitor where Carl Merrill has his office in Newton, Mass." He was some kind of selectman or something. And I asked him if he could do me a favor, and he said, "Sure." I dismounted a tire from an Adnock, and I wrote on it, "These tires are junk, Peter Fiandaca, 135. And I asked him if he'd put it on his desk Monday morning before he got to work. And when I came to Monadnock on Friday, I was coming down the hill to the pit. Carl Merrill was coming down the tire, and he met me at the bottom. He says, "I don't know how you do it, but I understand these tires are junk." I was watching The Hustler. Paul Newman was great. He looked good, made all the right moves, done everything that a great actor should do. Then walked in Jackie Gleason and stole the show by being himself. I was so impressed by that. I thought from that day on, if I just be myself, I'll do good. Thank you. Peace, peace.